Hi everybody, it's Kerry Stead, aka Melbourne Games Coach, bringing you some action from the 2013 Australian Open Chess Championships from North Leagues in Cammeray. This video is going to look at the action from round 9, and as usual we'd like to thank our sponsors: Hancock Prospecting, North Leagues, Ridges North Sydney, Australian Chess Enterprises and Chess Discount Sales. Looking at the games from round 9, we're going to start with the top board clash between FIDE Masters Gene Nicacci and Bobby Cheng. This is a game position after 26 moves. The queens have just been exchanged on d4, and obviously the knight on c4 is threatened, so Nicacci played knight e5. Cheng then played rook f8 to go after the f4 pawn. Nicacci doubled on the f file, and Cheng swung the rook over to a4. Here Nicacci played g3, happy to give up the a pawn, although obviously rook a1 was really not such a pleasant thought in terms of defence. Bishop takes the pawn on a2, rook a1, bishop back to b3, and the rooks are exchanged. And now we have a really interesting, somewhat unusual sort of position here. We've got rook and bishop against rook and knight ending, but we've got three passed pawns on one side. Then on the opposite side of the board we've got three pawns against one. So very unusual sort of situation where you've got an extra pawn but there are multiple passed pawns on the board. Here Nicacci decided to start pushing his passed pawn immediately, playing f5. The bishop came to b3. The pawn continued up the board to f6, and now it's starting to become a little bit dangerous. In response, Cheng started pushing his pawns, and this allowed Nicacci to play knight d7, obviously threatening both rook and the pawn on c5. Rook c8 to try and defend those threats, and then rook f5 to again threaten that c5 pawn. Here Cheng, rather than trying to defend anything, came up with king f7, and after rook g5 threatening rook g7, Cheng played king e6. This actually gave Nicacci a bit of an opportunity. In the game he chose to play rook g7. However, knight takes c5 check was a possibility, obviously forking both king and bishop. This leaves Cheng in a bit of a dilemma here. Obviously he can give up the exchange, but then it's going to be difficult for him to actually get both or even one of those pawns on the queen side through against a rook. So the most obvious defence is to play king f6, hitting the rook on g5. This then allows knight e4, and depending on where Cheng puts the king there could be a repetition. So if you go back to e6 again, knight c5 repeats the position, and you're back to king f6 and knight e4. Alternatively, if you go to f7, then we have rook takes b5, hitting the bishop on b3 as well as threatening rook b7, check picking up the a pawn, which kind of gives away pretty much any advantage that Cheng has in a position. If we go back to the position after knight e4, the alternative move is say king e7, again we can have rook b5, again hitting the bishop and threatening rook b7, picking up the a pawn. So very interesting choice here for Nicacci, and this might have been a way to hold the game for Gene. However, instead of taking on c5, he decided to play rook g7. Here Cheng came across and defended the c pawn, and rather than take on h7 immediately, Nicacci played f7. Cheng was forced to give up the bishop to stop the pawn promoting, and then played b4. So now we've given up, Cheng's given up the piece to get those three pawns rolling on the queen side, and here Nicacci decides to immediately give the piece back with knight c5. Cheng captures with the king, Nicacci takes on a7, and then king b6, which allows Nicacci to again pick up the other pawn on h7. So here again we have an interesting situation. We've got a rook ending where Cheng's obviously b pawn is going to be very dangerous. The white king's well and truly unable to stop that, so the only thing that's going to be able to stop that b pawn is Nicacci's rook. And Nicacci also has to watch, Cheng has to also watch out for those pawns on the G and H files for Nikauchi going forward. Here he played b3, obviously looking to get that b pawn rolling as quickly as he can. Rook h4 to threaten rook b4 check. King b5 to stop that. Rook h5 check. Blocks with the rook. So now obviously we're far too slow if the rooks are exchanged. Rook h8 to check from behind. Rook c2, cutting the king off and restricting it to the back rank. And rook b8 check. King c4 and then h4. So Nikauchi's trying to get those pawns rolling himself. However, Cheng keeps this well and truly under control. Pawn up to b2, h5, and now rather than trying to promote immediately, he gets the king back to d5. Here, again, Nikauchi has the problem that because of the king position, they really can't do much. So he tried g4, but after rook c1 check, promoting the pawn, and then the rook is sacrificed, g5, just simply king e5 and king f6, and the king's well and truly there in time to catch the pawns. The king's going to go to g5, take the h pawn, the rook can come back to stop the g pawn. So very nice finish there for Bobby Cheng. That kept him in the lead, and after the results on some of the lower boards, he was actually a point clear at the end of the round. Next game we're going to have a look at is a very interesting clash between Grandmaster Igor Kenkin and International Master Milton Lee. Starts off as a Slav, and Kenkin plays a very quiet system, e3 immediately. Now after knight f6, bishop d3, e5, Milton obviously playing very actively. Here, if the pawn on e5 is taken, then d takes c4 is good for black, either giving up the queen and allowing knight g4. So if, for example, bishop takes the pawn on c4, then simply queen takes d1 and knight g4, well and truly getting the obviously the threat on f2, as well as getting the pawn on e5 back with a perfectly fine position. And alternatively, after you take on c4, if you take on f6, then you can simply take on d3, and that looks perfectly fine for black as well, with a big pawn on d3 that's going to cause some potential problems later in the game. So instead of doing all that, Kenkin took on c3, and this allowed Milton to play pawn to e4. And after the bishop came back to c2, we're actually in a bit of an unusual position here. It's almost a bit like an advanced French with colours reversed. Bishop came to d6, and Kenkin immediately played pawn to f3. Again, if you think about it as a French in reverse, it's often a very good move there to hit the front of the pawn chain with f6 in a regular French. So in a reversed advanced French, f3 makes perfect sense here. So they exchange on f3, both players castle, and the rook comes to e8. Kenkin brings his queen to e1, obviously heading for e4 and looking to get some sort of attack going on the king side. Milton brought his knight to d7, exchange on d5, and then queen h4. So here we can already start to see some attacking ideas from Henkin. We've got the semi-open f-file combined with the diagonal for the bishop on c2, the queen on h4, all targeting h7. If the knight on f3 moves, the rook on f1 could potentially remove that defender on f6. So Milton plays pawn to h6, and Henkin continues with this big attack, pawn to g4. Very strong move, looking again to open up some more lines around black's king. Obviously with the bishop on c8, the rook still on a8, the knight on d7 not really getting involved at the moment, Henkin's not really worried so much about his king coming under fire. So knight f8 to again keep that king nice and safe for Milton, and then g5 continuing to try and open up lines. After the exchange and recapture with the knight, here Milton actually played a mistake that allowed Henkin a chance that he missed in the game. Best option here is actually to play bishop e6, just holding that d pawn and trying to obviously develop and help defend. And after a move like bishop d2, white has a perfectly fine position, and it obviously has a slight edge, but it is just that, just a slight edge, and black still has plenty of fight in this position. However, after taking on g5, Moulton played bishop e7. This actually allowed Henkin the possibility of playing knight takes d5, which is not what he played in the game. Here, obviously, if you take with the knight, then bishop h7 check is going to lead to a very quick checkmate. Obviously, if you take it, simply queen takes, and you've got a choice between rook f7 or queen h8 mate. Or if you play rook h8, king h8, then knight takes f7 immediately as mate. So knight takes d5 is not an option. Queen takes d5, bishop b3 is the killer. Again, lining up on that long diagonal with bishop f7 if the queen moves out of the way. So again, going to be very, very strong for white. An alternative, bishop e6, but then you have knight takes e6, and again, a number of branches here. If f takes e6, then you can simply take on f6 and then play queen g4, and so very comfortable position for white. Obviously, with those two bishops still very strong, central pawns, and that extra pawn to the good as well. Alternatively, after taking on e6, black can try taking on d5. Obviously that uncovers a threat on the queen, but white's more than happy to exchange queens and then take on f7. Here you might say take on e3, and after all the exchanges, then bishop b3 again is going to leave white with a healthy pawn to the good, a much safer king, and plenty of threats as well. So definitely an opportunity missed there by Henkin. So after bishop e7, knight d5 really was the move to play, and afterwards Moulton admitted that he hadn't seen that move, and obviously felt he would have been in some trouble if Henkin had played it. However, as the game went, Henkin played bishop to d2, just developing that bishop so that the a1 rook can come into the game. After pawn to g6, again trying to block out that diagonal, is where Henkin decided to really go for the win. Sacrificed the piece with knight f7. King takes, now knight takes d5, something that was probably 2 moves later than it needed to be. King goes to g7, bishop on e7 is captured, and then pawn to e4. To try and defend, Moulton played the knight back to g8. Obviously if the queens are exchanged, it's going to be good for black, and here Henkin really missed his final opportunity to keep the pressure on. Here obviously he doesn't want to exchange queens, but queen g3 looks like the best move to really continue to keep that pressure on, with pawn to e5 coming. You've got the rook on the f file that could potentially be doubled. So for example, to play a move like bishop d7, again e5 is going to be very, very strong. You can play moves like rook f4 and rook f1 to double on the f file, and you're also threatening maybe even just take on f8 and then take on g6. So there's a lot of attacking potential there. Alternatively, if you play a move like knight f6, then bishop g5 is going to be very strong with e5 coming. So plenty of attacking options after queen g3. However, in the game Henkin played the immediate bishop g5, and the problem with this is that after Moulton's reply of queen d7, he has quite a significant threat. Not only is there queen takes d4, but we're also threatening queen g4, trading off queens. So Henkin tried bishop f6 check. After taking, queen takes, king h7. Again, we're still threatening that check on g4, and alternatively there's a consolidating move of queen g7 that's coming. So even if you try to move like rook f4, simply queen g7 is a way to consolidate, trade off material, get the king safe, and then Moulton's actually a piece to the good. So Hagen felt he had no choice but to bail out with a repetition. King G7 and Queen H4. And in this position, they obviously agreed to draw because of the triple repetition. So this left Bobby Cheng a clear point in front. Our next game we're going to have a look at is a very, very wild clash between Junta Akita and Andrew Brown. I'm not going to make much comment about the early part of the game. It starts off fairly quietly, a bishop b5 Sicilian, but very, very quickly turns wild after knight takes e4. And really some wild chess here with pieces flying everywhere. Queen b6, pawn to a4, finally black castles. That allows rook takes e7, there's pawn to c4, bishop going back to f1, taking on b2, hitting the rook rather than defending the rook. Akita captures on d6, then bishop takes c4, pawn to b5, so the queen's got some way to escape from the corner. Bishop goes to b7, the rook comes back to e2, so we're now threatening rook a2, so queen a5, capturing the other rook from Akita, pawn to d6 to try and restrict that bishop. So yeah, really a very, very wild game from both players at the moment, taking on d6, taking on f7, King's going for a bit of a walk. Very interesting move there, bishop e8, so you're threatening queen f7 check. Bishop c6, again trying to exploit the fact that if the queen does go to f7 there could be a rook b5 and rook takes b1 made idea at some stage, so pawn to c4, that stops that queen f7 idea. Queen retreats to d8, queen returns to d1, hitting the bishop on d6, as well as obviously the bishop on c6 is attacked as well. Queen g5 takes on c6, queen h5, so pinning the rook with threatening rook takes bishop now. We've also got, as we'll see in a minute, rook takes b1 as a threat as well as queen takes h2, so g3, rook takes b1, queen takes b1, queen takes e2, c takes d7, bishop c5, and once all this is, all the dust is settled, as it were, obviously now we've got threats of queen f2 and queen f3, so queen a1, king comes out to h6, and then queen f6. So in this position, once all the dust is settled, all this crazy opening play has got through, we've got a position where Akita's actually 2 pawns to the good with a pawn on the 7th, so it looks very, very much like a dominating position for him. Queen d1, king g2, bishop came back to b6 to try and hold that pawn. Queen f8 check, and after king h5, pawn h3, trying to set up some sort of checkmating net here against the black king. Queen d4, g4 check, queen g5, and here Akita managed to still win the position eventually with a very nice tactic in the end that we'll see, but here a very nice opportunity was missed. Akita can actually promote here, and regardless of which way things are taken, so for example bishop takes d8, very nice idea here, we have f4 check, so obviously if the king comes to h4 then queen h6 is going to be made, so queen takes f4, then pawn to h4 check, king has to take the pawn on g4 and then bishop d7. Obviously now the only way to get out of check, we've either got to block with the queen or take on h4 or go to h5, which again leaves the queen unprotected, so takes, and obviously after taking the queen it's simply going to leave white a queen up with a clearly winning position, so that would have been a nice tactical opportunity for Junta, but as he played in the game was still not such a bad option either. King takes to f4, queen to f7 check. Here there may have been chances for Andrew to defend with king e4, although it's still very, very tricky. He went back to g5, the queen came to f3. Here it looks like Andrew has time to play queen takes c4, which is what he did in the game. However, after very, very nice move here from Junta, it wrapped up the game. Queen e3 check. Technically, it's a fork forking the king and bishop. So very, very nice. Obviously, if the bishop is taken on e3, that removes the defense of d8, so the pawn can promote. And after a couple of checks and a queen getting safe, then we can simply capture the bishop and be a clear piece ahead. Or, as the game went, the queen came to f4 to block, and another very nice move by Junta, setting up that same sort of tactic that we looked at, d8 queen immediately. So again, if you play bishop takes the queen on d8, we then have that h4 check idea, and again bishop d7 the finish, and removing that defender of the queen on f4. So very, very nice game there by Junta with a very very nice little finish. And finally, another game, this time between Grandmaster Daryl Johansson and Peng Yu Chen. Daryl plays his English as his way to avoid the Grunfeld and this queen a4 line. And it's really very interesting to see how Daryl really gets an initiative early and keeps it. So obviously queen d4 threatens the rook in the corner, f6, e4 hitting the knight in the centre, e5 hitting the queen. Very nice move here, knight takes e5, so obviously if pawn takes, we'll take with the queen and then take the rook in the corner. So knight takes c3, queen takes c3. Again, if the pawn's taken, we still have queen takes e5 and queen takes the rook on h8. So queen e7. Calm retreat here back to c4. Queen takes the pawn, the knight blocks. Now, to defend the pawn on f6, he tries bishop g7, bishop c4 to keep the king in the centre, king d7 trying to obviously develop some pieces, castle b5 hitting the bishop, d3 hitting the queen, queen comes back to e5 threatening a trade, and d4, queen comes back to d6, and now rook e1. So obviously if you take the bishop on c4, we've got again either knight f5 or knight c4 with a discovered check, which is going to win the queen. So king to d8 to get out of that. Bishop returns to f1, pawn to f5 to try and put some pressure on the d pawn. A very simple move here, bishop to d2, and after bishop takes d4, queen c2, and it's really very difficult for black to find a good move here. He tried bishop b7, but again, there's not really that many alternatives with the rook on the e-file and the move that we're going to see in a minute. So after rook d1, obviously there's threats with the bishop on d2 moving, and various discoveries on the d-file. Then you tried queen c5, a very nice simple move here, queen a5 check, and obviously we can't block with a knight, as that if you play knight b6, that allows queen takes the queen on c5, as the bishop can't defend as it's pinned. If the king moves to the e-file, again we've got these discoveries on the knight, but very simple. After say king c8, simply just go and double on the d-file, and there's no way to defend both the bishop on d4 as well as the knight on d7. So a very nice little way to pick up a piece from a fairly quiet looking opening, and a very nice game there by Daryl. So that's going to wrap up the games from round number 9. Of course, if you're unable to make it to the tournament itself, the best place to follow the action is on the official tournament website. You can see the links there. The easiest way to get there is via the Norse Chess Club website, northsydneychess.org. Follow the links, and the tournament website has all the games, draws, results, and more. Or you can follow the updates on my blog, melbournegamescoach.blogspot.com. Once again, thanks for watching.